Okay, thanks for joining us this morning. It's a really sunny, beautiful morning here I'm in North London, and I'm joined by Mo Jafar. And thank you so much for giving up your time to have this conversation, Mo. And as a general rule, I don't do introductions, and so I'm going to go straight over to you, Mo, to let people who are listening, who might not know you, hear about you, your work, your thoughts, what you're doing, where you've come from, etc. Over to you, Mo.
Okay, cheers. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me on and for having the chat. I always enjoy talking PE, and I've followed a lot of your stuff. I read a lot of your stuff, and I always find myself nodding along. So we'll see if that continues today. So yeah, long story short, I came into education kind of via the back door. So went to Kingston and did a sports science degree. Originally from Canning Town, Plaistow. So that's where I grew up. And went to Kingston, did a sports science degree. Went to basically coach for West Ham Foundation, who used to be called West Ham in the community, because I failed a module and I had some time. And I thought I'd go part-time and do a bit of coaching. So I volunteered for a bit, managed to get my level 1, my level 2, and just coached all around Newham, Tower Hamlets, Essex. I used to do a children's centre like in the morning and then go and do under 16s, pre-academy and stuff like that. I've always been in and out of schools. And then I managed to get into a school via West Ham doing working with the Prince's Trust. And this was like a qualification really that students used to do. And there were students who were at risk of exclusion, so they'd all be in this group. And we'd do loads of different things with them. We'd do healthy lifestyle, we'd do nutrition, but we'd also do like cost of living, like working out your budget. So yeah, just life skills in inverted commas. And I was with some 3 amazing ladies, and I still speak to them now. They're like my work mums, and they're still my work mums. And they kind of just advocated for me to come and join them as a learning mentor in the school. And I did. So I was a learning mentor in the school. And they gave me a couple of hours unqualified PE, which was obviously always my long-term goal, was to be a PE teacher. I wanted to be a PE teacher from year 11 parents' evening all the way through. So then eventually I got through unqualified. I was in the last year of GTP and at UEL. Had amazing time at UEL, so I was kind of working 4 days and then on a Monday. The year after my NQT year, a job popped up for head of year in the school, and I'd been in the school a while then, so I'd been in a lot of different roles. So even though I was just qualified as a teacher, I'd been there about 4 years, and I just went for it. I went for it for the experience. I ended up getting the job, so I was head of year a year after being a PE teacher for 4 years, and I loved it, absolutely loved it. But it took a massive toll on work-life balance. You're doing like 12-hour days, which is what most teachers are doing, but then you also trying to do your other work on top. And I just wanted to get back in PE. Schools are interesting, so they put me, I asked to go back in PE, and they said, okay, you can't go back in PE because there's no hours there, so you're going to have to go science and geography. So I did 7 hours of geography, 8 hours of science, 7 hours of PE, and then I had 1 or 2 hours of geography. And at that point I was like, yeah, I can't really do this for the next 10 years. So I started looking around, ended up at Royal Liberty in Romford, Gideon Park, as head of PE. So it was my first head of PE role, 2018. Absolutely loved it. Still love like thinking about and talking to the boys from there now, staff and students. I actually bumped into some students yesterday. It was quite funny. And it got to a point, to be honest, at Royal Liberty, where I was kind of exploring so many different things with PE, and I didn't want to just do the same thing. And I didn't really have the space to try new things out and to fail. And Alex Becky, who you know really well, sent me a message, said, there's a job at UEL. Would you be interested? And I said, well, I've got no chance, Alex. I've got no masters. I've never taught in higher education before. The only thing that got connected me to UEL is I went there. But he said, well, why not? You've got nothing to lose. And I spoke to Sri-Ann Lynch, who's amazing, because I've had a good relationship with her over the last year. And I got her advice and said, do you think I'll give it a go? And I gave it a go, and the rest is history. As I say, I got the job, and I've been there since April. So yeah, that's kind of been my little journey to where I am now.
Yeah, thanks. And well, what a great story. It's really inspirational when we hear people who have progressed through their profession despite some hiccups and setbacks. And you mentioned that you failed a module, and I guess looking back, that's a bit of a pivotal moment. And I had the pleasure of talking to ex-student actually who's doing really good work, Ben Anderson, who's also taken, I guess, what universities politely call a non-traditional route. And I made the point on that conversation that when you compare and contrast to, I hold my hands up, someone like myself, and I had a much more straightforward, in many ways, much more privileged journey through my first degree, at least, and and into the profession. But one of the things that really jumps out, Mo, is and from your the work you've done, the conversations you engage with on social media, is and you touched upon it there. You're really keen to explore. You seem to have a very inquiring mind around. I don't know if it extends to all aspects of your lives, but that's beyond the scope of this conversation. But it certainly applies to teaching and learning in physical education, and possibly broader than PE. Where do you think that comes from? And it's a hell of a commitment, though, to you really jumped into stuff, and engage with the research papers as a teacher, and engage in conversations around that. It's really, it strikes me as being unusual. Maybe you don't think it is. So talk us through where that comes from.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation, because I think my mum would say, I was that kid that always said, why? And she'd always say that to me. And I think that has always been there. So I think what happened, Greg, was when I got into the head of PE role, no, tell a lie. When I got into the head of year role, you have a kind of perception of how things are and how things should be. And you kind of look at all this stuff. But then you start doing the role and you realize, actually, that stuff doesn't really work, but that doesn't really match up there. So you start to find your own little way of doing things. And then it gets unstuck because it doesn't really fit with the system. So I have to move on again. I have to try something else. And then I'll get to the head of PE role. And the only time I'd ever really known about a curriculum and all these kind of things was just from my old head of department. And that's most people. I've just followed what we've always done. I'd been at one school. I'd spent 4 weeks at another school in Barking-Dagenham, an unbelievable school. Again, still speak to those members of staff now and have a great relationship. But I'd only known one way. So I got to a point where I was now in charge and where I could decide where we went. And the first year, I just copied and pasted from where I'd come from. And then I got to a couple of points, and I always find that I found myself uncomfortable in a few places. I found myself uncomfortable in teaching cricket, for example, because my school had never done cricket. We'd never done it to a certain extent. And I found myself really uncomfortable officiating basketball because I'd never, ever done it before. I'd been a teacher for a long time, but you're kind of constrained by the curriculum of your school unless you go out and do stuff or unless you've done stuff previously. And maybe this is an indicator of the PE curriculum that I had, because I've never done PE. I've never done basketball. We used to have to walk to Leisure Centre, and if you know Newham Leisure Centre, that's a good 2 miles away from Cobham School. So I was always aware I had some, I wouldn't say weaknesses, but I had some areas to develop. And I got to a point where I was like, actually, if I really, really want to develop a team and develop a PE career, I need to know some stuff. I need to go and look at some stuff and not just look at it, but actually really know it, because athletics is a good example. So for me, I've always taught athletics, and then I started looking over lockdown at some of the people who do this for a full-time job, who actually train athletes and really and train young people. And I thought, actually, I had no bloody clue. The teaching points that I've been using for the last 10 years that everyone's been using, do they really work? Are they helpful? So you just start to dig, and once you pull the thread, you think, oh my God, I haven't got a clue about any of this stuff whatsoever. So that's where I've always been inquisitive. I've always been okay, why? What are we looking at? And I'm obsessed with learning. I'm obsessed with learning myself. I'm obsessed with how do I help someone else to learn. I'm obsessed with the idea of knowledge at the moment. It gets bounded around so much, but actually keep digging and digging and digging. Okay, what does that actually mean? Because it's such a weird concept that I just find it interesting. I just find it interesting to know things and to actually apply things, and also I find it interesting that the more I know, the more I don't know. So it's like an endless like cycle. So I really enjoy that. Just keep digging, and when you find something, you're like, oh my god, it completely shifts your whole way of thinking of life. That's like a real like educational experience for me, and that's what I kind of want for other students, my students, to have that kind of like aha moment where they think, oh my god, or I want it for myself. So yeah, that's I don't know if that's explained it enough. But.
Well, I guess if you're into the production of knowledge, then yeah, you were probably always destined to end up working in university, which in theory, I suppose that's what they're meant to be doing, pushing out knowledge, and applied knowledge is always useful. And we could probably have a longer conversation, but it wasn't really on our agenda around is the knowledge that's coming out of PE. Well, I don't know, let's go there for a little bit and see what happens. How applicable do you think knowledge production in our field is? Because I mentioned in my intro to the last question that I thought that your engagement in original sources, in the research papers themselves, which has led you to where you currently are and shaped your thinking, I made the assumption that it's unusual. And I get it, that it's time consuming, it's not easy to access, and some of those papers are really difficult to understand. So, if you're a busy teacher or plus a parent and have got other roles in life, why would you spend an hour of your time on a weekend trying to unpick the latest pedagogical paper? But you did. So how applicable, accessible and useful did you find that as you went through your time leading a PE department?
I think it's kind of starts with what your purpose is. It's not like but I didn't just look at this stuff. How can I explain it? But I have a vision of what I think PE should be. And it's a lot more than just one thing. It's not a lot more than just knowledge reproduction of some teaching points from somewhere. It's a little bit more, it's a bit bigger than that. So I felt like I have to. It's not like why would I read this stuff? It's like, why wouldn't I? If I really, really, really want to develop life, so let's say one of my aims in PE is to help children or young people to feel confident to go and live a healthy, active lifestyle when they leave, then I have to find the best way possible that I can. And it's not to say that like I have found that way, I'm ever going to find it, but I kind of need to just go on that journey. So yeah, I really can't. I think you probably noticed from the history, I can't really stay still unless I feel like I'm doing something worthwhile. And if I feel like I'm doing something worthwhile, then fine. But as soon as I realise and feel like actually this is like a dead end road here, then I kind of start looking at avenues to get out or to find somewhere that's going to really, really push me on again. So.
And what about the point about how did you access it as a practitioner?
Yeah.
Presumably you don't have an institutional online library to download anything that you want to. And
yeah.
How did you find navigating the actual literature, which could be really difficult, can't it?
Yeah. It's interesting, Greg, because like I'm from East London. Like if we want to get something, we can get something. if I want to find what's the new film, I know someone who can get it. But no, I'm not saying I found the bootleg versions of journals. But a lot of stuff is open access, a lot more than you probably think. You just type something into Google Scholar, it's fine. The second thing, and I saw someone say this years ago, and I just thought, okay, well, I've got nothing to lose. I just ask people. Look, I'll ask the question on Twitter, or I'll just email someone and say, would you mind sending this? And to be honest, the spark really came from lockdown because everyone was doing webinars. There was always something on. I remember like my timetable was just full up in a week of webinars, and I made some amazing connections. If I'm being honest, if I didn't have some of the connections I've made in that time, I probably wouldn't be sat here speaking to you now. So James Rudd is a big influence for me because he kind of opened up a lot of doors for me, but also he engaged with me, not just as, oh, here's my paper, and he like engaged as a person. So we speak a lot. So yeah, I kind of like got to know people. And then what I realized as well was when I'm reading something like a paper and that's something I don't understand, I just do the snowball and go and have a read. And to be honest, Greg, some of the times I'm reading stuff and I have no clue what I'm reading. But I know somewhere along the line, it's going to make some sense. So as I've started to, over time, to build up an understanding. And I think that's really key, is dwelling in the area. It's all well and good saying, oh, it's really hard to understand. But yeah, but how much time have you spent on it? It's a bit like we do with playing sport. Oh, I'm trying to learn golf at the moment. And I say to myself, oh, I'm really struggling. Well, how much actual time do I spend in it? So it's what you value, isn't it? If you really value something, you'll spend time in it.
Yeah.
So
I think
that's what it is. Yeah.
I think you raised a really interesting point there about how, and again, it's a huge question. I'm not sure I could get anywhere near the answers, but schooling and education teaches young people who then grow into adults, obviously, that when you read something, you need to understand it, you need to comprehend it, and that's the key point. And I think you raised a lovely point that there's nothing wrong with reading stuff and not totally getting it. And the more similar literature you read, the more those pieces come together. And I think that's the same with any genre, any field of work. You've got to get familiar with the nuance, with the jargon. If I walked into if I'd just arrived in the UK from, I don't know, let's just say country X that's not a cricket playing country, and I'd sit in a cricket bar or a locker room, I'm in the cricket team, I wouldn't have a clue what's being said.
Yeah.
But like you said, and I think your analogy with golf is really applicable. The more you're in it, the more you just find a comfort in it. You find where your boundaries are, and then you know where to go. And I think that leads us on really nicely, actually, to where we wanted to go and really exploring this notion of knowledge. And I was going to go straight to the recent publication you had with Nathan and Alex Becker, you've already mentioned, which is very much looking at the knowledge that sits beneath what's regularly referred to as a knowledge-rich curriculum, and where that paper came from. But you've already introduced the idea of what does a teacher need to know, because you were saying in reflecting on your journey that there were aspects of the curriculum that you weren't totally familiar with, basketball and athletics you mentioned. And so that is a view of subject knowledge, the technical, harder subject knowledge, like what are we trying to do in basketball? But if you don't mind me saying, I think you did yourself a little bit of a disservice, because you've actually gone in a lot, or arrived at a place which is beyond compartmentalizing physical education into distinct activity areas. And look, I get that. And it was something, when I went into teacher education, and this may sound arrogant, it's not meant to be arrogant, but I guess because of the privileges I had with my own schooling, and I wasn't the kid who had to walk to the basketball court, so we did have a lot of basketball, and we had a lot of opportunity to play a lot of different stuff. So being in an athletic space or a basketball space or whatever it was, like I always took that for granted as a teacher. Like, yeah, I could get my head around what we're trying to do here, and then we could concentrate on, well, how do we teach that? And so you're very much now at a place where you're thinking about teaching and learning processes. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, really fair. Yeah, because my original thought was the same. As I'm head of PE, I need to know some stuff. I need to not only stuff being some sports. I need to know how to do these sports, and if I know how to do these sports, then I'll be fine. And I quickly realised that's only going to hold water for a little bit of time, because some of these sports are not made. I have this feeling like some of these sports have never been made for children, for young people. I always think if you were to reinvent cricket for young people and children, you wouldn't have half the rules that you have in there. And that's not to say cricket is bad or shouldn't be taught, but I just think, like, yeah, it was probably the wrong direction. No, it wasn't the wrong direction. At the time, it was the right direction, because that's what I was only thinking about. But it did lead me to think a little bit more, okay, it really doesn't matter about what we teach. It's more about what's the intention, what we're trying to achieve, and how are we going to do that? And then you can insert in a million different things. And that's kind of where my thinking is now, is like, what is our intention with PE? So if my intention is to try and help someone to be fit and healthy, then why don't you just do fitness training, circuit training the whole year then? No, because that would be boring or that. But so then you start to dig a bit deeper. Okay, well, actually, is it, if it is to be like live a healthy, active lifestyle outside of school, the thing what keeps them bugging me is that sport doesn't do that, and it's not done that for many people. And the research tells us that actually having this model of just sport, I feel like I'm going off topic here, but just stop me if I am. But yeah, if we're going to use sport as the model for the aims, when all the research, and this is what I started to dig and says that actually there are some positive things with sport, but there's massive dropout when kids get into certain ages. There's groups that are marginalised in sport. You can't just take sport as a positive thing. And I know you've said this before, and then not take all the negative that comes with it. Because I see all the deviance that happens with sport. I see all the negative connotations that happen with it as well. So it's, for me, it's not just about developing a knowledge of activities anymore. It's more about, okay, a way of working, a way of doing. And that's why we go back to the article. That's why our original thought was to write the article, because we saw a lot of conversation about constraints-led approach and non-linear pedagogy and I felt like it was being a little bit misconstrued with some people. And that's part of the process. You start in the beginning with something, you read a blog post or you read something, but we felt like actually people needed to understand a little bit of the underpinning beneath it. So we originally were going to write an article just about using these pedagogies, using these strategies, but we thought actually it's more helpful to understand. And then the Ofsted review comes out and it kind of like hits us in the same time. Like there's a big narrative here to go one way in terms of what knowledge is, but actually it's bigger than just knowing how to do something and what something is. Like I can know I know all the stuff about golf, I know all the etiquette about it, but I still felt completely uncomfortable the first time I went to play around the golf on my own. Like, so I don't even that having that knowledge didn't help me. Now, as I've been there a little bit more and got to know the etiquette and got to know the environment and felt a bit more comfortable, now my knowledge has improved because I feel like I've got like a knowledge of the environment of golf, not just that here is hole number one and don't put your bag on the green and all these kind of little intricate things. I've felt that. So yeah, I kind of went off topic there, Greg. I'm not sure.
No, don't worry about it. I'm not sure you did, because I think it's all really relevant. And yeah, again, if we look at you at the golf course, at the golf club, and I'm sure you've joined a very exclusive club, Mo.
Chadwell Heath, Greg. Chadwell Heath.
Yeah, well, as a fellow East Londoner, I know that's up there with St Andrews and the Belfry. But what you're also learning, presumably, and you can shout me down if this is an assumption, you're not only learning the etiquette, you're learning about you in that environment and how you respond to it and what works for you and what doesn't work for you, which leads us on. I'm going to go on swiftly, so I'm not even going to give you time to shout me down.
No, please do, yeah.
You mentioned that purpose and aligning knowledge to purpose and the Ofsted review, and we could talk probably for a long time about that. But if we just, so you were working with Nathan down at Marjons and Alex, and the Ofsted review sort of brought about a bit of a pivot in where you wanted to go with your collaborative writing. And so just talk us through, I mean, you mentioned that intent, and you phrased it as helping a young person lead a healthy, active lifestyle after they leave school. What do you think they need to know to be able to do that?
Yeah, I think that is one intention, and I just want to be like, it's difficult in an hour to talk to kind of get, yeah. So that is one intention, and I think that's an intention we should pursue. Like, but I also think the way you get there, the journey on the way, is probably as important, if not more important, because at the end of the day, we can't really control when they leave us in year 11, year 12, year 13. We can control the minutes they're with us at the time. So I just feel that you need to know how things feel. You need to experience things. And the way you experience things based on that Ofsted review, is to reduce things. For me, it was like reductionist. It was like, here are some ways that are going to help you to do an action or a movement better. And when you do these things better, you're going to be able to be more healthier and you're going to engage with the activity more. But actually, it doesn't look at the flip side of the coin. When that way doesn't really help people get better. It might help some people who are already doing sport. So, for example, what I mean is like telling people the teaching points for a certain movement and then giving them some practice and then giving them some feedback as a demonstration. What you're doing for me is narrowing the field of knowledge, because that knowledge, number one, has to come from somewhere, and it normally comes from the teacher. It normally comes from a coaching manual. This is kind of what we said in the article, like the information that we're imparting or the knowledge we're imparting, there's lots of questions around it. Whose knowledge is it? What is the purpose of the knowledge? Who's the knowledge for? Because a lot of the time it's very ableist. It's not very ableist, it's completely ableist. Like, bend your knees and flex your wrist. What if you don't have a wrist? What if you're in a wheelchair? Like, it doesn't ever think. So it's too narrow for me. And it always will be narrow, because individuals are individuals, regardless of shape, size, race, culture. That everyone's going to be different. That doesn't mean that we can't work towards the same goal. So we just thought like that Ofsted review, where it didn't really explore the vast array of like literature that's out there, different ways to get to the same outcome or similar outcomes. It was very, very narrow. And it doesn't take into account experience. It doesn't take into account emotions. It doesn't take into account how people feel when they do things. So yeah, it was a weird one. And I'm really interested in that whole body-mind dualism, because the way we feel and the way we act is not just about in our mind. It never is. We're part of a society. We're part of a culture. We're part of our emotions have a big impact on the way we do things and why we do things. So why not work with that? That's my question. Why do we need to reduce it?
Yeah. I mean, I wrote a piece shortly after the Ofsted review, flagging up some of the same points. And indeed, a couple of months before the review, I had I had a conversation with the author of the Ofsted review, Hannah Miller, at the AFP conference, and after she'd presented, and it was just the two of us were left in the room, and we just sat down and had a chat for about 45 minutes. And I really appreciated her time. It was very interesting talking to her. I really understand, and I think on a professional level, I sympathise with the constraints that she's working in, and I was putting to her similar points around the presentation, the model that she's using, knowledge rich as she's interpreting it in physical education. I put to similar to what you said, that we're focusing on the wrong knowledge, the technical knowledge, progressing into scientific knowledge. And you said it's ableist. The technical knowledge is ableist, and couldn't agree more. And it's also invariably very stage and age inappropriate, because what tends to happen is, what we're really saying is, adults move like this when they put the shot, or when they shoot a basketball, or when they do a handstand, and therefore you, as a growing body, you need to emulate that. And that whole reproductive modes of movement are very problematic if you align yourself to anything resembling learner-led pedagogy, and that's a very difficult round peg to square. I think it's almost impossible. But she came back at me, and she was very forthright, and I had a lot of respect for where she was coming from. And she said, even if you're looking at the affective domain, even if you're looking at your long-term participation being driven by what young people feel rather than harder knowledge, she said they still need to know what they feel. So I appreciate that this is a little bit out of left field and dropping you in it a little bit, Mo. But yeah. What do you, if you think back at your time at Royal Liberty, what do you think those young people needed to know so that they understood the effective domain? And do you think it makes any difference, which is the question I put back to her? Does it make any difference if they know, or can you feel without knowing? And that gets a little bit deep and philosophical. So